I am Christine Booker, the founder of Travel Booker Adventures. And what makes me unique is that I have been to the Canadian Arctic on numerous occasions, once by boat and twice on land. And apart from my native Africa, it is my favorite destination in the world. It has so much to offer. It is so grandiose. And being passionate about wildlife and conservation, as well as responsible and sustainable tourism, ecotourism, it's just a destination not to be missed for any nature lover. I am a safari specialist, and I design, and I have for the last 40 years designed unique excursions and journeys for people who bring home the most amazing memories. And as you can see from the various certificates over here, I have attended travel conferences all over the world where I was able to connect with industry leaders and conservationists from all walks. I've also been featured in the National Geographic. The best part of my working day is when clients come home from their trip and they tell me what they've experienced and how they've enjoyed their trip. Like Susan, who has booked 3 times with me and has now become a friend of mine. She just loves the trips that I booked for her. Both these ladies are online. Thank you so much for this lovely review. Wow, 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 they say. It just makes my day. I'm also a bit of a birder, although I'm terrible with bird names, but I love birds. And so I exhibited at the Ornithology Congress here in Vancouver and met some wonderful people there and was able to do a trip for them. And then, of course, I also arrange journeys into the Galapagos, and these people came back and said that they had the trip of a lifetime. So let's get into it. Some years ago, I went to the Canadian Arctic for the first time on an expedition ship, the Akademik Ioffe, which is a Russian research vessel. Now, the Russians have since recalled this ship, but there are many others to choose from. This one I absolutely enjoyed, and I just wanted to give you an overview of where I went. So down here would be Ottawa. I flew from Vancouver to Ottawa, and then from there we flew north to Resolute Bay, which would be over here. So imagine the vastness of our country when you think that it takes as long to fly from Vancouver to Ottawa as it does from Ottawa to Resolute. It was a 5-hour flight. There we boarded our ship and we traveled along Devon Island here with some stops en route. We'll go into detail. Then across Lancaster Sound, which is the wildlife highway of the north. This is the entrance to the Northwest Passage. Then we wanted to go down to Pond Inlet, but as you can see here, the ice was still too solid. And even though the Akademik Ioffe is an icebreaker, we just couldn't get through. We had an ice captain on board and he advised us where to go and where not to go, so we wouldn't get stuck. We were able to go for a beautiful hike up here though. So we traveled around this island, which is a huge bird sanctuary, and we had a polar bear swim. Well, almost. And then we entered here to Pond Inlet. We were traveling at the end of August, and it was the first time a ship could dock in Pond Inlet. Well, docking is saying too much because they don't have a dock. So we threw anchor there and we landed with our Zodiacs. But they hadn't seen people since the last September there. From there, we headed south along Baffin Island into Gibbs Fjord, where we were able to get off and walk on the ice. That was quite exciting. And then our plan was to head east to Greenland. But Baffin Bay was still full of ice, as you can see here, 9/10 of ice. So we had to go north. We tried to get in. We had to go further north. So we ended up back on the 75th parallel, which is where a Resolute is. And then from there, we were able to head down into Kangaluswak, which was our end destination, but not before stopping off in Jakobshafen, which is one of the fastest moving glaciers in the world and the iceberg factory of the world. So Kangerlussuaq is at the end of Sondre-Strandfjord, which is the longest fjord in the world as well. And in Kangerlussuaq, we flew out of an airport that used to be commissioned by the Americans during the Second World War. So that was a really interesting trip. It was 1,600 nautical miles and it took us 11 days. So this was our ship, the Academic Ioffe. Bob, I'm guessing you're back down memory lane here. This is where Bob and I met many years ago. If you look at the ship, it's not very small, but in comparison to the iceberg here, and then in comparison to these huge mountains, it's just a little dot in the ocean. This was one of the photos that Bob took of a young girl wearing an amalti, which is the traditional poncho that the Inuit wear. We met her on the beach in Pond Inlet. Funnily enough, in Pond Inlet, I met a South African couple as well. Who knew that South Africans would travel so far? They had lived there. He was working for the nature conservation people. They had lived there for some years, and we are still in contact now. Since then, they've moved to Iqaluit, where I was able to visit with my daughter, whom I had promised a trip to the Arctic, because when I came back from this trip, I was so enamored, I was so excited. She said, "You have to take me." So we visited them in Iqaluit. Along the trip, icebergs were amazing, and I took 1,000 photographs on this trip. I didn't have a camera at that time, so these are all photographs from a point and shoot or from Bob's beautiful DSLR. Look at these icebergs. I mean, they come in all shapes and sizes, and they are absolutely stunning. I couldn't take enough photographs of them. The first stop we had was in Beechey Island, which was the place where the 1840 Franklin expedition overwintered. They still have 3 gravestones left there. I just highlighted one so that you could see it. This was a 20-year-old chap, John Torrington, who didn't make it. A lot of them had scurvy and so on. It was very, very tough on them. And that was the ill-fated Franklin expedition. The next stop was in Dundas Harbour on Devon Island, where you can see the little house in the background. And imagine this was an RCMP outpost in the 1920s. They had 3 chaps posted there to protect the Northwest Passage. Now, if you live there all year long, half of the year it's pitch dark, and that little house out there is an outhouse. Now, if you got to go and there's a polar bear, you better watch out. Sadly, there are also 3 graves at this area because depression does set in and arguments and so on, so none of those guys survived. But it was a very interesting place to stop. We walked around there. Before we got off, they had 3 scouts that went off the boat first to scout out whether there were any polar bears around. They were armed guards. And once the coast was clear, we could get off and walk through the tundra there. We did see a beluga whale skeleton that the polar bears had brought on land and feasted on. And some more icebergs. So this was during the crossing of Baffin Bay, and you can see the icy bits there. And depending on how close they are together and how deep they are, you can either try and attempt to go through or you've got to go around. This was the Baylot Island Bird Sanctuary. These cliffs are a mile high, and if you're sitting underneath them in your Zodiac, you see these birds nesting on these tiny little ledges. It was so impressive. And then, of course, to top it all, this polar bear decided to go for a swim with us. And he was swimming around our Zodiac. It was just so amazing. Then we went down into Gibbs Fjord. It was very misty during that time, but it did lighten up a little bit. And so we were able to get off the ship and do a landing on ice. And so that's where I walked on ice. That's me all wrapped up. Yes, it was a bit cool. Not as cold as Churchill, but it was cool. And these were the sightings we had of the polar bears. One was on an ice floe. The other was on Baylot Island. And the picture in your bottom left here is of Pond Inlet, where the local people go out to hunt, and you'll see these furs hanging outside their houses to be cured. Then this picture is of the Jakobshafen ice field, that fast-flowing glacier that I was talking about. We rode around there in Zodiacs. It was freezing. It was like being in a freezer, but it was so beautiful. The sights there were amazing. We landed in Greenland in both Ilulissat and in Sisimiut. The architecture and the people are completely different on the Greenland side. And I was wondering why that is. In Pond Inlet on Baffin Island on the Canadian side, you've just got a couple of houses on stilts that are government built, and everything is rather depressed. This side is colorful and light and so on, and it has to do with the sea ice. So the west coast of Greenland doesn't actually get locked into sea ice. So they've got a thriving fishing and whaling industry all year long, and they can get out on the ice. Whereas in Pond, you're locked in and you never see another person for half the year or 3/4 of the year. On board, the bridge was open, and here you'll see the ice captain and the expedition leader colluding to see what else they can show us on the next day, what the plans are for the next day. One day they backed us up to an iceberg, and we had a barbecue on the back deck, which was rather nice. And then we headed to Kangerlussuaq, and off we went to back home again.